The first defense, Jericho, Bronze Age walls, and the birth of Siegecraft. The moment humanity chose to settle and cultivate land, they created two fundamental things: wealth and vulnerability. The need to protect stored food, valuable resources, and the community itself against external threats gave rise to what is perhaps the oldest continuous military technology in history: the fortification. A wall is not merely a barrier. It is a declaration of permanence, a concentration of power, and a commitment to collective defense that fundamentally alters the landscape of warfare. Understanding the history of civilization is impossible without understanding the history of the wall. The story begins with a few simple facts. Early human settlements were soft targets. Nomadic tribes driven by famine or expansion could easily overrun temporary villages. The first true leap in organized defense emerged as farming became dominant, necessitating the long-term storage of agricultural surplus. This is where we encounter what is often considered the oldest known wall in the world: the fortifications around Jericho, dating back to roughly 8000 BC. Built of stone and mud brick, these structures were not just defenses against invaders. They were also vital defenses against seasonal floods and a powerful symbol of communal organization and engineering sophistication. Jericho's walls established a foundational principle: defense requires more investment than attack, but the payoff is survival. As the Bronze Age dawned and city-states emerged, the scale and complexity of walls grew exponentially. In Mesopotamia, city-states like Uruk and Babylon were encircled by massive ramparts designed not just for height, but for thickness and complexity. The Ishtar Gate in Babylon, with its glazed blue bricks and processional way, was as much a testament to imperial power and religious awe as it was a defensive structure. These walls served as early forms of deterrence, broadcasting the message that attacking this city would be a costly and time-consuming endeavor. The wall became the central piece of infrastructure around which an entire society was physically and politically organized. The existence of walls naturally spurred the innovation of siegecraft. For the attacker, the wall was an obstacle that had to be overcome quickly, as prolonged sieges were expensive, prone to disease, and susceptible to relief forces. Starvation, or the prolonged siege, was the most common tactic, relying on superior logistics to wait out the defenders until disease and hunger forced surrender. However, the empires of the Near East, the Assyrians, the Hittites, and later the Greeks, began developing the first dedicated siege engines. The Assyrian Empire, a brutal military machine, pioneered the use of the battering ram and early forms of the siege tower. These towers, massive wooden structures on wheels, allowed attackers to reach the height of the walls, dropping soldiers onto the parapets or using a protected vantage point to clear the defenders. Assyrian bas-reliefs vividly depict the relentless, systematic destruction of fortified cities, showcasing their mastery of combining these new technologies with disciplined troops. The Greek world introduced another level of sophistication, particularly with the development of torsion-powered artillery. While the early Greeks primarily relied on phalanx warfare, the need to take fortified cities like Troy, a story whether true or myth that underlines the importance of circumventing a strong wall, drove them toward more complex solutions. By the time of Alexander the Great and his successors, the catapult and the ballista, essentially giant crossbows capable of firing heavy darts or stones, had become standard tools. These machines could provide covering fire, suppress defenders, and, critically, begin to systematically weaken sections of the wall itself, marking the point where the advantage began to shift, however temporarily, toward the attacker. The tension between the defensive ingenuity of the wall and the offensive engineering of siegecraft would become the constant, defining dialectic of military history. Every stronger wall necessitated a more complex engine of destruction, a technological arms race that would shape not only the battlefield, but the entire architectural footprint of human civilization. The city was defined by its ability to endure, and endurance required a well-built, well-defended perimeter. Walls of Empire Rome, torsion power, and the art of systematic siege. As the ancient world transitioned from the city-state rivalries of Greece to the era of massive empires, the scale and sophistication of both fortifications and siege technology exploded. The Hellenistic period following Alexander the Great saw the development of truly specialized, massive siege machines. But it was the Roman Empire that turned both wall building and siegecraft into a systematic, standardized, and devastatingly effective military science. The Hellenistic successor states, particularly those ruling the wealthy cities of the Eastern Mediterranean, invested heavily in defensive architecture. They built towering stone walls, often reinforced with deep ditches and complex interlocking towers, aiming to make traditional scaling attacks impossible. This drive for stronger defenses led to the invention of the largest and most terrifying siege engines the ancient world had ever seen, exemplified by the inventions of Demetrius I of Macedon, known as the besieger of cities, Polyarchetes. Demetrius's crowning achievement was the Helepolis, literally, taker of cities. This was a 9-story high siege tower, armored with iron plates powered by hundreds of men, and equipped with its own artillery on multiple levels. It was essentially a mobile fortress designed to overwhelm the highest city walls. However, the most lasting legacy of this era was the perfection of torsion artillery. Greek engineers refined the design of the ballista and the catapult, utilizing twisted bundles of sinew or horsehair, torsion springs, to generate immense power. These became precision weapons capable of punching holes in walls or raining large projectiles onto defenders from a distance. Torsion artillery allowed armies to conduct long-range bombardment, shifting siege warfare from purely close-quarters engineering to a problem of physics and geometry. When the Roman Republic emerged as the Mediterranean superpower, they adopted and industrialized these Hellenistic concepts. Roman legions were unique not just in their infantry discipline, but in their capacity for military engineering. For the Romans, siegecraft was not an auxiliary skill but a core competency. They didn't just lay siege, they systematically built an opposing fortified city designed to neutralize the defenders. A classic example of Roman siege genius is the Siege of Alesia, 52 BC, where Julius Caesar defeated the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix. Caesar's legions didn't merely surround the city, they built 2 massive fortified walls, a 7-mile-long inner circumvallation facing the city to contain the defenders, and a 14-mile-long outer contravallation facing outwards to defend against a massive Gallic relief force. This double wall system, complete with ditches, watchtowers, and traps, was a demonstration of the power of organized military labor, effectively besieging the besiegers. On the defensive side, Rome's ambition was to define and protect its empire not just with garrisons, but with linear fortifications that acted as permanent, organized boundaries. The most famous example is Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, built starting in 122 AD. This was more than a barrier. It was a sophisticated defensive zone, a stone wall, deep ditch, mile castles, small forts every mile, and numerous auxiliary forts, all designed to control movement, funnel traffic, and enforce Roman jurisdiction. It was a political boundary as much as a military one, defining civilization against what they considered wilderness. Later, the Antonine Wall, built further north, represented a brief, forward-thinking extension of this concept. These great linear walls showed Rome's strategic maturity, a recognition that the empire had reached its natural limit. The defense shifted from offensive expansion to resource management and border control. The vast network of walls, roads, and fortified camps, castra, solidified Roman power and allowed their legions to deploy quickly to any threatened point. The legacy of Roman fortifications is twofold: their mastery of temporary functional siege architecture, camps, towers, ramps, and their use of permanent monolithic walls as a tool of geopolitical control. This engineering prowess was the silent partner to the legion's discipline, proving that the foundation of imperial power lay as much in the architect's blueprint as in the general's strategy. The next major threat to civilization would force defenses to evolve again, integrating these lessons against new, mobile threats and the slow, inevitable pressure of barbarian migrations. The Unbreakable defense, Byzantium, concentric castles, and the medieval masterpiece. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire did not signify the end of advanced fortification. Instead, the focus of architectural and military genius shifted to the east, where the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, needed to secure its immense wealth against relentless invasions from migrating tribes, Persians, and the surging Arab caliphates. Their masterpiece of defensive engineering would stand for over 1,000 years, defining the pinnacle of pre-gunpowder siege defense. This masterpiece was the defensive system of Constantinople, specifically the Theodosian walls, completed in the 5th century AD. These walls were not a single barrier, but an intricate, multi-layered defensive zone that rendered conventional siegecraft obsolete. The system consisted of 4 main components: a deep 60-foot wide ditch that could be flooded, a low outer wall, a 27-foot high inner terrace, and the main inner wall, towering at nearly 40 feet high and reinforced with 96 massive towers, each spaced to provide overlapping fields of fire. This layered defense forced attackers to breach 4 separate obstacles under constant bombardment, providing defenders with successive lines of retreat and counterattack positions. The strategic genius of the Theodosian walls was demonstrated repeatedly. They withstood dozens of sieges by the Avars, Bulgars, and crucially the massive Arab sieges of the 7th and 8th centuries. By holding this strategic choke point between Europe and Asia, the walls saved not just the Byzantine Empire, but arguably the trajectory of Western Europe itself from early Islamic expansion. Their sheer scale and complexity represented the ultimate defensive response to the tactical challenges posed by the ancient world's siege engines. As Western Europe emerged from the Dark Ages, the central political and military unit became the feudal castle. The medieval castle was far more than a defensive structure. It was the physical manifestation of feudal power, territorial control, and economic dominance. Early castles were simple motte and bailey structures, an earthen mound, motte, topped by a wooden keep, protected by a palisade enclosure, bailey. While simple, they could be constructed quickly and represented an effective answer to cavalry raids and local peasant uprisings. The 11th and 12th centuries saw a massive investment in stone castles. Stone offered superior protection against fire, and the early, relatively weak siege artillery of the period. Key architectural innovations included the keep, the central, strongest tower, serving as the last line of defense and residential center, and complex gatehouses, which became death traps known as murder holes and portcullises. The entire design was centered on forcing the enemy to expose themselves in kill zones. The ultimate development in medieval military architecture was the Concentric Castle, perfected during the Crusades in the 13th century, often built by forces like the Knights Hospitaller, e.g. Cruc de Chevalier, and by English kings like Edward the Fern in Wales. The concentric design was inspired by lessons learned from Eastern fortifications, applying the layered defensive concept perfected at Constantinople. A concentric castle featured a castle within a castle, 2 or more rings of walls each protected by its own towers, with the outer wall lower than the inner wall. If the enemy breached the outer wall, they were caught in a narrow kill zone between the 2 rings, under direct, plunging fire from the higher inner wall. The defense was designed to be active, not passive, maximizing the use of missile weapons and minimizing the space the attacker could use for cover or maneuvering siege engines. The castle and the city wall dictated the nature of medieval warfare. Sieges were long, arduous affairs, often lasting months or years, and successful defense depended on provisioning, water supply, and the morale of the defenders. The medieval period solidified the advantage of the defense, forcing attackers to rely overwhelmingly on massive financial investment in siege forces, or the psychological pressures of hunger and disease. This defensive dominance profoundly influenced political stability, enabling small feudal lords to resist kings and dictating the slow pace of territorial consolidation until the arrival of the ultimate game-changer, gunpowder. The era of stone dominance was magnificent, but its end was fast approaching. The Great Rupture, gunpowder, siege artillery, and the end of the Castle Age. For over 1,000 years, the stone wall, from the multi-layered Theodosian defenses to the concentric rings of the Crusader castles, held a decisive, mathematical advantage over the forces of attack. The sheer labor and time required to breach a well-built stone fortification meant that defense was the superior military posture, fundamentally shaping the political landscape of feudal Europe. This long-standing equilibrium, however, was shattered irrevocably by the arrival of a single transformative technology: gunpowder. Gunpowder, invented in China, made its way to Europe via the Silk Road in the 13th century, Initially used for primitive rockets and small, handheld devices, its potential was immediately grasped, but it took 2 centuries of metallurgical refinement and engineering development to fully weaponize its destructive power for siege warfare. Once it was harnessed, the result was a military revolution that marked the definitive end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the early modern state. The core innovation was the siege cannon. Early cannons were notoriously unreliable, prone to exploding and difficult to transport. But by the 15th century, engineering improved sufficiently to create massive bronze and iron cannons capable of firing heavy, solid shot. Where previous siege engines like the trebuchet relied on gravity and counterweights to throw projectiles over the wall, causing limited, scattered damage, the cannon delivered focused, brute kinetic energy directly against the wall's base. This was the critical difference. A steady cannon bombardment could turn massive stone walls built over decades into a pile of rubble in days. The moment that symbolically cemented the end of the Castle Age and the ascendancy of gunpowder was the fall of Constantinople in 1453. The Byzantines relied entirely on the Theodosian walls, those 1,000-year-old defensive masterpieces that had repelled every attacker for a millennium. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, understood that victory required overwhelming centralized artillery power. He employed engineers, including the Hungarian master Urban, to cast colossal cannons. The largest of these was the legendary Basilic, or Great Turkish Bombard. A cannon so massive it required dozens of oxen and hundreds of men to move, and could fire 600-pound stone balls. For weeks, the Basilic and other Ottoman artillery relentlessly pounded the same sections of the outer and inner walls. The continuous focused impact of solid cannonballs proved too much for even the layered Byzantine defenses. Once the breaches were made, the Ottoman janissaries poured through, ending the Roman Empire's 1,000-year continuation in the east. Constantinople's fall was a global demonstration that no medieval stone wall could withstand modern artillery. The implications were instantaneous and vast. Suddenly, the great imposing castles that had allowed small feudal lords to defy kings became obsolete death traps. Their high vertical walls were excellent targets for cannon fire, and their static designs offered no defense against plunging shot. The age of decentralized feudal power, built on the defensive strength of the castle, rapidly collapsed. The new reality demanded a radical shift in defensive architecture. Fortification engineers realized that they could no longer build up height. They had to build out width and depth. The response to the cannon's brute force was the revolutionary design of the Tres Italienne or Star Fort, which would dominate military architecture for the next 3 centuries. This radical shift in form was a direct, existential reaction to the invention of gunpowder, fundamentally changing the relationship between warfare and the built environment. The era of pure vertical stone dominance was over, replaced by a geometric, low-profile science of earthworks and angles. The geometric defense, star forts, Vauban, and the age of siege science. The decisive triumph of the cannon, epitomized by the fall of Constantinople, forced military engineers across Europe to conclude one stark truth. The high, thin, vertical medieval wall was dead. The age of building upwards for defense was over. The new age demanded building outwards and downwards, embracing geometric complexity to defeat the crushing kinetic force of the siege artillery. The defensive response to the gunpowder revolution was the Tres Italienne, or the Star Fort. Born in the independent city-states of 15th century Italy, where warfare was constant and siege technology was rapidly evolving, the Star Fort was a radical architectural departure. It was less a wall and more a geometric system. Its design principles were revolutionary. 1. Low profile in earthworks. Instead of towering stone walls, star forts were built low to the ground and heavily sloped, often using massive quantities of packed earth behind the masonry. Earth absorbed the impact of cannonballs far better than rigid stone, preventing spectacular breaches. 2. The bastion. This was the crucial defining feature. Medieval towers were round or square, creating dead zones, areas that defenders could not shoot into, right at the base of the wall. The bastion, a sharp arrowhead-shaped projection, eliminated these dead zones. Its 2 faces allowed defenders to deliver devastating flanking fire delivered along the face of the adjacent wall, into any enemy force attempting to scale or mine the curtain wall. The entire fort became a single interlocking system of mutual support. Three-layered defense, glacis and ravelins. The fort was further protected by sloping earth banks, glacis, designed to deflect cannonballs and obscure the wall, and triangular outworks, ravelins, placed outside the main walls to break up attack formations and force the enemy to fight for every yard of approach. The result was a fortification that was immensely difficult to approach. Attackers could no longer simply pound a single point. They had to conduct a slow, systematic, and geometrically precise operation to neutralize the bastions one by one, often involving digging elaborate zigzagging siege trenches, saps, to approach the walls without taking flanking fire. The siege evolved from a problem of brute force into a problem of mathematics and logistics. The pinnacle of this new siege science was achieved by the French military engineer Sébastien Leprestre de Vauban, 1633-1707, who served Louis XIV. Vauban did not invent the Star Fort, but he standardized, refined, and perfected the design into a massive interlocking network of defensive fortifications across France's borders. His genius lay in two areas. First, he mastered defensive placement, building forts that controlled strategic choke points, harbors, and border routes, effectively creating an impenetrable defensive belt around France, the Pré-Carré. Second, and perhaps more importantly, Vauban formalized the science of the attack. He codified a step-by-step methodical process for taking a star fort, realizing that since the defense was perfect, the attacker had to rely on a slower, more perfect geometry. His methodical system involved laying down parallel siege trenches to protect his troops, using specialized artillery batteries to suppress the bastions, and advancing methodically toward the breach point. Vauban's methods were so successful that the phrase "Vauban laid siege to a city" and "Vauban took the city" became a common military adage. Vauban's legacy cemented the dominance of the siege era. Star forts defined the landscape of 17th and 18th century warfare, making large-scale battles rare and prolonged. Mathematical sieges the norm. The massive financial cost of building and maintaining these complex structures contributed to the centralization of power, as only wealthy nation-states could afford such defenses. The age of the independent feudal lord was truly over. Military power was now mathematically concentrated in the hands of the king, who commanded the best engineers and the deepest treasury. Beyond the battlefield, linear defenses, colonial outposts, and the Great Wall. While the European military focus during the 16th through 18th centuries was dominated by the geometric precision of the Star Fort, a parallel and even grander tradition of fortification persisted globally. The construction of massive linear defense systems, or walls designed not to protect a single city, but to define and defend an entire civilization or empire. These structures, spanning continents, represent a monumental commitment of resources driven by vast geopolitical threats. The quintessential example of this strategy is the Great Wall of China. This was not a single continuous barrier, but a vast network of walls, trenches, watchtowers, and fortresses, built and rebuilt by various dynasties over 2 millennia, with the most famous sections dating from the Ming Dynasty, 1368-1644 AD. Unlike the city walls designed to withstand a siege, the Great Wall's primary function was control and communication. The purpose of the Ming Wall was threefold. First, to monitor and control movement, preventing nomadic incursions, like the Mongols and Manchus, and cattle rustling. Second, to serve as an elevated road for the rapid dispatch of troops and supplies across vast distances. And third, to provide a rapid communication system via signal fires lit from the watchtowers. The sheer scale of the Great Wall, stretching thousands of miles, demonstrated the immense military and economic disparity between the settled, agricultural Chinese Empire and the mobile, pastoralist threats to the north. It was an enduring commitment to defining the southern limit of the steppes and the northern limit of Han civilization. This strategy of linear defense was not unique to China. In India, massive fortress complexes and extended walls, such as the impressive Kumbhalgarh fort walls in Rajasthan, protected vast territories and centers of wealth. These walls, often integrated into challenging terrain, showcased the ingenuity of regional builders who adapted defensive principles to local geography and climate, creating formidable obstacles to invasion. Simultaneously, the rise of maritime colonial empires in the 17th and 18th centuries introduced a new type of strategic fortification, the coastal trading fort or outpost. European powers, the Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British, established fortified harbors across the globe, from the Caribbean to Southeast Asia and West Africa. These colonial fortifications, such as Elmina Castle in Ghana or Fort St. George in India, were crucial nexus points for the transfer of goods, spices, slaves, raw materials, and naval power projection. These colonial forts were often hybrid designs, integrating the cannon-resistant principles of the Star Fort, low bastions and thick walls, with the sheer logistical requirement of acting as self-contained warehouses, administrative centers, and military garrisons far from the mother country. They were designed not to repel massive siege armies, but to withstand naval bombardment and local uprisings, securing the critical trading beachhead. The battle for global economic control in this era was often fought city by city, fort by fort, along the world's coastlines. The most enduring legacy of these 18th century coastal forts was their role in establishing permanent global naval power. They allowed empires to resupply, refit, and rearm their navies thousands of miles from their capitals, making true global power projection feasible. The ability to maintain these forward operating bases was what allowed Britain to ultimately triumph over its rivals in the struggle for global dominance. By the 19th century, however, two new inventions began to render both the Star Fort and the ancient linear wall obsolete. Railroads, which bypassed static defenses and allowed rapid troop deployment, and the development of high-explosive shells, which demolished the earthworks and masonry of older forts. The age of static visible defense was giving way to a new, concealed and dispersed form of warfare, setting the stage for the dramatic and bloody final chapters of fortification history in the 20th century. The next conflict would see walls go underground. The Underground War, the Maginot Line, Total War, and the illusion of impenetrability. The 20th century brought the concept of fortification into its final, most paradoxical phase. Advances in military technology, specifically the internal combustion engine, mass production of high explosives, and the invention of the aircraft, meant that the static, visible defense structures of the past were now liabilities, not assets. The age of the high medieval wall and the geometric Star Fort was over. The new era demanded that walls go underground. The century's first attempt at massive static defense came in the aftermath of World War I, a conflict dominated by brutal trench warfare. The French, determined never again to suffer the devastation of German invasion, invested billions of francs into the Maginot Line, named after Minister of War André Maginot. Constructed throughout the 1930s, this was the ultimate expression of the defensive mindset. It was not a simple trench. It was a vast, subterranean, self-contained linear city of concrete and steel, running along France's eastern border with Germany. The Maginot Line featured interlocking concrete casemates, anti-tank obstacles, ventilation systems, electric railways connecting underground fortresses, ouvrages, and even comfortable living quarters. Its design was brilliant and virtually impenetrable to direct attack. It was built to withstand the heaviest known artillery and sustained aerial bombing, aiming to funnel any potential German invasion through the neutral lowlands, Belgium, where the French army could meet them on favorable terrain. The failure of the Maginot Line in 1940 was not a failure of engineering, but a failure of strategy. The Germans simply bypassed the entire system by cutting through the Ardennes forest and driving their mechanized forces, blitzkrieg, around the line, achieving a stunning, rapid victory that demonstrated the utter supremacy of mobility and air power over static defense. The Maginot Line became the quintessential symbol of military thinking trapped in the past, an expensive illusion of safety. The Germans, themselves masters of defense, also relied heavily on massive permanent fortifications later in the war. The Atlantic Wall, built to defend the continental coastline from Norway to the Spanish border, was a vast series of bunkers, gun emplacements, and coastal artillery batteries designed to repel the inevitable Allied invasion. Though imposing and locally effective, particularly at heavily fortified points, the Atlantic Wall suffered from the same strategic weakness as the Maginot Line. The Allies achieved air superiority and naval dominance, allowing them to choose their points of attack and concentrate overwhelming force, culminating in the successful breach at D-Day. As World War II ended and the Cold War began, the nature of the ultimate threat changed from conventional artillery to nuclear weapons. This new danger initiated the final, most extreme phase of fortification, the construction of deep underground bunkers and command centers. These structures, like the North American Aerospace Defense Command NORAD facility deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, or the deep underground Soviet Metro II system, were not designed to stop an army, but to ensure the continuity of command, communication, and government after a nuclear exchange. They were pure survival capsules, the ultimate manifestation of the defensive impulse aimed against existential threat. In the 21st century, the age of the physical wall is not entirely over. We see new walls built for political and social reasons, border walls. But the great military fortifications have largely dissolved into history. Warfare today is dominated by asymmetrical conflicts, cyber warfare, and highly mobile drone technology. The wall has been replaced by the firewall and the no-fly zone. The history of fortifications, from the mud brick of Jericho to the subterranean concrete of NORAD, is the history of human fear and ingenuity. Every wall built was an expression of power, a division of humanity, and a technological challenge. And every single wall eventually fell or became obsolete, proving that no human construct, no matter how brilliantly engineered or expensively built, can forever withstand the relentless pressure of innovation, politics, and time.